Okay, this next step is going to be a little bit hard to describe. What we're going to do is we're going to take the lightest color of the Castle Gray colors, the lightest gray, and we're going to dry brush it on top of the brick. Now, you might like the color of brick we've got just fine, and if you do, just leave it like that. Don't even worry about putting a dry brush of gray on top of it. But if you do, I really suggest make some test pieces like this out of some extra castings and try this out, because this is a little tricky to get the dry brush to come out right. And I'll try to explain what's going on and what I like and what I don't like about the dry brushing of the gray on top of the brick. So what I've got is this is house paint. So the house paint is a little bit thick. But I'd even like it a little thicker than that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my brush, I'm going to dip it in here, and I am going to go back and forth over the paper towel. I'm going to get some more paint on there, back and forth on the paper towel, and I'm actually going to put a bit of paint on the paper towel. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this paint sit on the paper towel for a little bit here, because I want the paper towel to suck out the moisture of that paint. I don't want the paint to be quite so thin. And what I want is, I guess the best way to describe this, let me back up just a little bit. When we do a lot of the wood colors, this is a door that was spray painted with black spray paint, and then we dry brushed the medium earth tone on top of it. And look at the difference. I mean, the earth tone is really a pumpkin pie color, but this door is more of a dark oak color. You can see a little bit of it together, but it's not bright orange like this paint. And what happens is when we dry brush thin coats and thin coats and thin coats, the black transmutes through the earth tone color to kind of get a nice in-between color that's not so stark. But in the case of the brick, I really don't want this to transmute through the gray as much. What I'd like to do is have this gray outline the edges of the brick and then pick up the texture of the brick. I'm not looking to get a color between brick and gray. I'm looking to highlight the edges. So because of that, it's not that I want lots and lots of thin coats to slowly transmute the color through the gray. Instead, I want to use this gray to frost the edges. So in order to do that, I'm going to leave this paint on here and let it dry up a bit. Okay? Now, I've let it sit here for a minute. It's probably good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and I'm going to work out, quite a bit of extra paint from here. And I don't want to see, if you take your hand, I don't want to see streaks. I can see a few streaks on my hand there, but it's not too bad. Let's just get a little bit more out. And I'm not as worried if I see a streak or two, because I want to pick up the edges. And what you want to do is go extremely lightly across the brick, okay? So what we're going to do is we're just going to take and we're just going to very lightly go across the brick, not much pressure. And what we're going to do is kind of highlight the edges. Now, I can see that almost immediately as soon as I put that on. But what I'm doing is just touching the edges really lightly. I'm lightly getting the surface on the top, and that's it. That's just enough to kind of pick up that brick texture and see it on the edges. And the edges are going to be like frosted, almost with a bit too much gray. But that's it. That's it, and we're done. You see that? It's not like we do with the other kind of dry brushing. The other kind of dry brushing, you go over and go over and go over and go over. This, we dry out the paint. We go super light, and we just get it to where a little bit of paint's coming out. In 4 or 5 strokes, you're done. That's what the dry brushing should do. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and do that for our brick wall. So we're going to take the brick walls that we have here. We're going to do the same thing. Now we've got this paint, we're just going to really, really lightly go over it. And you might occasionally see a brush stroke or two. So just lightly, what it's going to do, it's going to highlight or bring out the edges of the details. Just go over it really lightly, really lightly. It may take several strokes to get there. Oops. Okay, I'm seeing a few brush strokes there. Be patient. I mean, if you see a brush stroke and you let off and you don't see anything, just give it some time. Give it some time. It looks like this, I'm getting a little bit too much paint on my brush here. Let's dry a little bit of this off here. And there we go. That's a little bit better. Okay. That's a little bit better. I just want to highlight the edges of this. And we'll go across the top, and we'll highlight the top just a little bit. And you are going to see some gray here when we go across it. But just try to lightly go over it. There we go. Lightly go over it. And if you get to the point where you have to push hard in order to get this gray to come out, then you probably need to reload your brush. So we've got that one. Let's find one that's got a little more something to it. Here we go. Okay. And we're just going to lightly go over the edge here. That's it. Ah, that's it. That's just what I want. You see that? We're just getting that to come out. It's a matter of getting the right amount of paint on the brush. And that takes a little bit of time and a little bit of skill. And like I said, you don't have to do this if you don't want to. You can always just say, I like the brick the way it is. I'm not going to worry about dry brushing it. Because it's kind of easy to mess it up with dry brushing. I mean, you got this nice, deep, rich brick color, and you don't want to, if you don't want to fool with it, that's fine. Just don't fool with it and leave it the way it is. But that is coming out just about nice. We're just kind of frosting the edges a little bit. And that's bringing that texture out, and it's graying it up just a hair. And that's what we want. And I don't know if you can see it. If you look in here, you can kind of see the variation in color of the brick. That's from when we kind of blotted a little bit with the paper towel and just applying the stain onto the thing. Now, right now, my brush is just about perfect. Now that I've dry brushed the gray on each one of these samples, once again, the first one is almond, the second one is the pebble color, the third one is the camouflage sand, and the last one is the medium earth tone color. This is what each of them look like. This is what the almond looks like. This is what the pebble one looks like. This one's what the camouflage sand one looks like. And this is what the earth tone medium looks like. And surprisingly, they don't look that different, do they? I mean, they all look pretty darn close to the same. I mean, you can tell by looking at the back side. You know, look at the orange here and the yellow there, but when you flip them over, they're all pretty darn close here. So I don't know if you can kind of compare which ones you like better. For me personally, I still like the medium earth tone color just a little bit better. There's a little bit more yellow to it. It's just a little bit of a richer color. That's the one I kind of prefer to use, and so that's what I'm going to do. Now I wanted to talk a minute about one thing that sort of bothered me with these wall sections and the painting scheme that I had come up with here. If you take a look at the front section, the brick actually looks pretty good with that little bit of gray on it. But looking at the wall section by itself, whenever I dry brushed the front it worked, but when I went to the top, it seemed to really hit the tops. It really frosted the tops a lot more than I had intended. In other words, the same amount of paint that works well on a flat surface is just way too much paint for all the detail on top, because you can't really hit any of the brick. You can only hit all the edges. Now this really bothered me, and so at one point what I did is I even took some red glaze and browned it up a little bit from Games Workshop, and I actually painted over a piece to get rid of the kind of the white frosting that's on there from the too much gray. And what I found is when I set it on top of the game board, I liked these pieces better. And I'll kind of try to show you why here. This is a sample from the Zombicide game board right here. Okay, this is one of the board sections. And what you do is basically you just set your wall section on here like this. And what I had found is once you get it down, and I'll just put another wall section here, and actually get it on the board and actually get some miniatures on it, the colors worked pretty well for being on top of the game board. In other words, all of this extra frosting that kind of highlights the top of the brick helps the wall stand out because the game board is so busy. So when you actually get your models on there and actually get things moving around on the board, the frosted tips on here actually define the wall surface a little bit better so you can see it. And I don't know, another thing that I kind of noticed about it is that on some of the colors on the board, you see this frosting almost has just a touch of a purple tinge to it. But it almost matches really well with the color that's on the board already. So the wall, with the color the way it is, looks like it kind of belongs. When you look at it on its own, without the board, it really, I really wasn't that impressed with the piece. It just seemed like too much. But when you look at it actually played on the game board, it really looked a lot better. So finally, what I'm going to do is just leave it as is. And that'll be the instructions for painting the wall sections. Now, I would always suggest doing a painting test whenever you do these, just to see that the colors are coming out according to what you're going to set it on. So if you're going to set a brick building on a grassy hill, do a couple of wall sections and also test the tops of the walls while you're doing it, just to see if these wall sections, the paint color is going to work out for you with the setting that you're actually putting it on.